and also our other government colleagues in the Ministry of Community, Sport and Cultural Development. The goal of the webinar series is really a key concern around market affordable housing in our communities, but also for industry and stakeholders and citizens across BC who are challenged with finding affordable housing that meets their needs. These webinars really to help to share information with folks around the province, to also create a forum to encourage the sharing of solutions that work at the local level, and create a community of practice where folks can bring ideas forward and also meet the needs of what information you're looking for at the local level. As we know, we best learn from each other. And this webinar format is a way of doing things that hopefully makes things easy and cost-effective for folks to participate. It also helps to build on the momentum of the Affordable Housing Symposium that the Canadian Home Builders Association of BC has been holding for the last couple of years, and it hopes to continue that discussion over the interweb, I'll call it. And it also opens it up for folks who can't travel to such events. This webinar will hopefully be the beginning of a pilot of 3 webinars. This one, particularly today, helps to set the context for the series by helping us explore some of those economic and other drivers that affect housing affordability. Our second webinar in November will help us get an inside scoop from a developer's point of view on the elements that help to contribute to the cost of building affordable housing, and take us through a pro forma, which is the developer's guide to helping to calculate costs for a housing development, and also to see those different elements and how they help to make or break a project. And then in January, we will get down to the nitty-gritty and take a look at how secondary suite bylaws and enforcement work in different communities, and take a look at 2 different local governments, what has been the step-back solutions and successes with implementing their secondary suite policies. So I will move forward and get us into the real meat of this webinar today with helping to introduce some of our presenters, which I'm sure a lot of people already know and don't really require much introduction. So first off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Cameron Muir. Cameron is a well-known economist and housing market expert. He joined the BC Real Estate Association as the chief economist in 2006. Since that time, he's built the economics department from the ground up, providing objective analysis, research, and regular forecasts of the economy, market housing, and mortgage rates. He's also used to work at the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation for 10 years. He's also a member of the Canadian Association of Business Economists and the Association of Professional Economists of BC. He's also an appointee to the provincial government's Economic Forecast Council. And so without further ado, I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Good afternoon. My pleasure to take part here today. I've got about 15 minutes to briefly go through some things that I tend to look at with affordability. It's pretty hard to have this a treatise on affordability when we have such limited time. I am trying to figure out how to draw my slide up. There we are. First slide. There we are. So I got to cover 5 points here briefly, I think, that I kind of see from my kind of 30,000 feet up in the air here. And first thing is that affordability or increased affordability via rapid home price depreciation is not very likely. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. General affordability measures also can be quite problematic because we see a lot of high-level ratios which really don't tell a picture of what's actually going on in the marketplace. A third thing is I want to look at timing demand and supply. And with housing, it's extremely difficult simply because of the ability of builders and developers who are, particularly in the large metro areas, to satiate demand in a short period of time. A fourth thing is I'll talk a little bit about first-time buyers and how they're one of the most important market segments for which anyone should look at in terms of a housing market, in terms of both affordability and the health of the marketplace. And finally, thank you for the poll that land came out as an important element, because my last component is, land component of housing construction is the one thing that we can shift around a little bit, but there are some dangers around that. So first of all, things I'm still waiting for to happen in the marketplace. Well, I'm waiting for flying cars, hoverboards, portals, and cyborgs. We haven't seen that. And the other thing I'm still waiting for is the great real estate crash of 2013, which was predicted in January of this year. Unfortunately, we haven't, well, I guess fortunately, we haven't really seen that yet. And the reason why I kind of pull this out is that, there's some expectation amongst many participants, industry participants, that perhaps we're going to see a significant price correction in the marketplace, and that's going to add to affordability. The problem with that is the analysis around this kind of overvaluation in the marketplace and its imminent demise tends to be somewhat back of the envelope, if you will. And that, the reasons, if there was a sufficient macroeconomic shock in order to drive home prices down 30 or 40%, those that would think housing is affordable would actually find it likely unaffordable because our unemployment rate would be extremely high, and many of those who would likely have been able to take advantage of lower home prices wouldn't have jobs in order to secure a mortgage. So it's a little bit problematic in that regard. One of the ratios that's typically used, I think it was used in Maclean's magazine as well, is this idea of home price to income ratios. A firm called Demographia every year gets a significant amount of media attention around their most unaffordable cities list. As you'll notice here, Vancouver is number 2 to Hong Kong. And instead of a home price to income ratio, they are using what's called a median multiple, which is exactly the same thing, median incomes to median prices. In Vancouver, I think we look here closer to home, it was a close 9.5%, something about that, around that according to this chart. Hong Kong's number 1. But if you look at all the top cities in terms of the top on affordability, they all tend to be more global gateway cities, those that have a significant amount of economic diversity, those that have a significant amount of job growth and amenities. So there's got to be some reason why this is occurring, and I guess part of the irony with the Demographia's analysis here is that sometimes this is used as a reason for greater housing regulation because of the fact that housing is unaffordable in these cities, and Demographia's reason for existence is to actually get rid of land use regulation. So I think that's kind of ironic. If we look at housing as a multiple of income in terms of price, you see Vancouver's 9.5%, and you would think that, well, if we look around Vancouver, where would we expect to see that much less figure? Where is it, who can afford housing in Vancouver? And so, it's been suggested to me that perhaps some of the more tonier areas of Vancouver, if you live in Shaughnessy, you should certainly be able to afford housing there. Well, whereas if Vancouver is the total, according to this survey, is 9.5%, I did a little looking here, and in fact, in Shaughnessy, prices of homes in Shaughnessy are 24 times the household income in Shaughnessy. So I don't know whether we need to provide some relief to those wealthy individuals in Shaughnessy or not, because apparently they're least affordable amongst all major cities in the world, and that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke there. My point is that it's very hard to take a look at incomes and affordability without looking at such things as interest rates and particularly overall wealth. So it's kind of a stock and flow argument where, incomes don't necessarily tell the whole tale. You can have, an income in Shaughnessy, I think it's about $140,000 a year. On average, the net worth of individuals there is much more. So their wealth is great. Perhaps their reported income not so great. Doesn't mean that housing as a whole is that unaffordable. In fact, if we look at the lowest, according to Demographic, the most affordable city in the U.S., and I'll show you this, and I hope everybody doesn't decide to move there, is that the most affordable city, according to the survey worldwide, is Detroit. So I think it's a multiple of 1.5 income is Detroit, whereas Vancouver is about 9.5. But the only problem there is that not a lot of people want to actually live in Detroit, seeing as there's really not many jobs available there, amenities are not that great anymore, and the quality of life can be somewhat suspect. When we look at Vancouver, for example, Vancouver is a global gateway city, and we find that in global gateway cities that housing costs tend to be much higher than other areas. There's reason being is because there's plentiful high-paying jobs and abundant amenities. They also tend to have problems with congestion, particularly cities like Vancouver that has a constrained land supply. Vancouver is almost very much an island in the sense it has the mountains, the ocean, the agricultural land reserve, and the border. Land values in Vancouver have been bid up quite substantially over the last run-up. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Also, congestion transportation also steepens that kind of land price gradient as the longer, the more costly it is, both in time and money, to live far enough away to buy less expensive land. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be too far away simply because of the congestion and transportation costs. If we look at, another way of looking at affordability is the carrying cost. So this would look at, this is the carrying cost in British Columbia, this is the average priced home in BC combined with the prevailing mortgage rate at the time, and it's deflated, taking inflation out of the picture so that we can look at it over a long time series to see where we are today. Certainly, if you look where we are today, at least since 2006, we're quite a bit above what that long-term average would be. And there's been some pundits suggest that, of course, we always have to return to the mean, and that means that home prices have to fall as a result. I'm not quite so sure about that, and I'll tell you why. Between 2006 and today, we're probably looking at, we're looking at about 7 years almost. We've had 7 years where we've been trolling up and down from $2,100 to about $2,800 a month on an inflation-adjusted dollar basis, and it almost appears to be that 2,100 is the floor level now. That's where we bounced back in early 2009, and it's where we hit in the winter of 2012, 2013 as well. And so from that perspective, you go, well, maybe there is a new floor in terms of where that average payment is or where affordability is in British Columbia. But there's another reason I think we need to look at this is that during that period that I have there, if you see the box, average price data in British Columbia became quite unreliable during that period as a result of some serious skewing in Vancouver. So if we look at, next slide is average price during that period, you can see between 2006 and 2013, there's quite a difference between the average price data that's being reported versus the benchmark price, which is a much better price indicator in Vancouver. So the benchmark price and the home price index are kind of inversions of each other. The home price index is an index and the benchmark price is an actual number. It's a combination of a hedonic price model and a paired sales model, and essentially it predicts what the price is for the typical marketplace. So during that period of time, we did not see, in terms of the benchmark price, that significant run-up, and that's why I would argue, as Vancouver certainly heavily weights the province, that if we go back to this box here, that's been kind of skewed substantially by pricing, average price data as a result of compositional effects in Vancouver. So it's actually not as high in terms of the carrying cost historically as it may appear. In fact, if we look in Vancouver, for example, I'm using Vancouver as an example because it weights the province so heavily, is that the condominium market, apartment townhouses, really haven't moved much in price at all since the recovery in 2009. In fact, they're about the same today as they were at the end of 2009, and if you discount inflation, we've actually seen prices fall now about 5–6% since then, and that's on an inflation-adjusted basis, so that would be a quintessential soft landing from an economist perspective. On the detached side, however, we have seen some significant inflation in prices on that market, on that segment of the market. And part of that, I think, over the long term, we know that since 80% of housing starts are multi-units, that single-detached units in Vancouver are going to be a smaller and smaller proportion of the housing stock, which over time will garner an increasing premium. On the property ladder effect, and this is what I really look at in any market, is first-time buyer affordability. That's the most critical thing. For the baby boomers, the pig and the python working themselves into retirement now, for them it is not as much of an issue because the home price of their next home is really the incremental value of the difference between all that equity they've amassed over the last 30 years and the new home price. Whereas a first-time buyer, of course, only has a limited down payment. And so we need to be able to have enough of the market price so that first-time buyers can afford to get in there. Now, you could also look at this in some markets of the province that have a lot of interprovincial migrants or perhaps retirement markets that we need to be cognizant of values there vis-a-vis values from source provinces. But overall, in the large urban areas, first-time affordability is critical. Through the Real Estate Board of Greater Vancouver, about 30 to 33% of home sales in any given month are to first-time buyers. So a very important component. And I would argue that if we look at the pricing data, irrespective of what average prices say, and they're the highest in the country, and they get skewed by very expensive markets on the west side in West Vancouver, that first-time buyers can buy an apartment condominium in Vancouver, in Greater Vancouver, or Metro Vancouver, for $250,000 to $300,000 all day long. And that would suggest their income would only have to be about $15 to $18 an hour for a couple to be able to afford to get into those homes at today's interest rates at about a 10% down rate. So first-time buyers can get into the marketplace. It's just that when we look at the housing stock today, is that it's increasingly diversified from what we saw 30 or 40 years ago. 30 or 40 years ago, your first home was a bungalow, second home was a two-story home, and your third home was, the executive home was a two-story home with a pool. Today, you start off with a bachelor apartment or one-bedroom apartment and work your way up to perhaps a two-bedroom apartment, to perhaps a townhouse, to perhaps a duplex, to a small lot single attached house, to a bungalow, et cetera, et cetera. And so the diversity of product has really made it, housing attainable for many first-time buyers, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen that segment of the market continue to be relatively buoyant. The other issue in affordability is actually, I just want to step back and say, when we look at affordability on the first-time buyer side, during the financial crisis recession, first-time buyers just vanished. Why? Because they had a small amount of down payment from the market, and they didn't want to see that evaporate. And if it's a deflationary spiral, why don't we just wait and buy a home at 50 cents on the dollar later? What that did is gum up the entire marketplace. Those who had their homes for sale couldn't sell those who would go up for their move-up buying, and so they're very important to any housing market. The other thing is timing. Timing is everything in any kind of market, and in real estate, it's a very critical issue. And one of the problems is that it's very difficult to match supply with demand, at least when we see large shifts in demand and supply. It typically takes, in a large urban area, 2 to 3 years from conception to completion for a large major project, and so that offers irregularities or abnormalities in the market operating. For example, if we look back in the year 2000, we had the lowest number of housing starts since 1962, and the following year, which would be completions, the fewest completions since 62, in 2001. You have to remember, in 1962, we had half the population that we do today in Vancouver. So home building was dried up to a significant degree during that time. In the late 90s, the economy was in the doldrums. We had tens of thousands of people leaving the province in search of jobs. And we also had this little thing on the coast called the leaky condo crisis. So what happened was housing was literally underconsumed. People didn't want to get into the marketplace, and a significant amount of pent-up demand welled up. So what happened is when we look at the demand side, here's residential sales just through BC. The curve in Vancouver probably look the same, or very similar, is that once we hit 2000, 2001, we saw an increase in overall demand during that cycle. What happened was first-time buyers and investors were first out of the chute. They didn't have homes to trade into the marketplace, so they drew down a lot of inventories. By the time builders and developers had the signal and actually had product complete on the ground to move in, it was a few years later, and there was a lot of catch-up being played during that period of time. As a result, strong demand, not enough supply in the market, prices get bid up, and that's really a function of real estate markets. It's a typical kind of lift and plateau effect in which prices rise in times of imbalance between supply and demand, and then they plateau or edge lower during times of relative balance. What we see so far, of course, during this current cycle is that 2012, we saw a lot of erosion in terms of overall demand as a result of tighter credit regulations, some trepidation amongst consumers, and this year we've seen a significant rebound in terms of overall consumer demand, coming back to what we would call long-term averages. Cost of housing is component, very important. Unfortunately, you know, to change the prices of homes, to reduce prices of homes, you really can't task home builders and developers to go out and build so many units out there that prices are going to fall and they're going to go bankrupt. So at best we can do is try and perhaps better facilitate projects to get through the stream much faster at times when markets are undersupplied. Soft costs can have an impact, certainly has an impact on overall development costs, particularly when we look at length of time and arbitrary kind of approval processes, but also through taxation. If we look on the taxation side, I think the Home Builders Association did some work at a home that you paid, a new home you paid $567,000 worth for, it was about $108,000 in taxes, fees, and levies and other embedded charges imposed by all three levels of government. So that's certainly a impediment to affordability there. And finally, the land value. Whoop, we didn't get the land costs. Where did we go here? Sorry, I have another little graphic on there. It didn't show up. My point here is that the residual value is what tends to be played with now. It's one of the reasons why municipalities around North America, or cities around North America, are looking, rather than just flat-out rezoning areas, is they have a negotiation with builders and developers in terms of bonus densities, upzoning, in order for the city or the jurisdiction to take part in some way in the list of property values. And that certainly has gone on strong in the city of Vancouver, and has in some instances gone a little too far, perhaps on the other side of the equation. We just have to look back at Concord Pacific, who had an appeal to assessment appeals board that essentially the negotiation on that land with the city of Vancouver resulted in the improvements that needed to be made, resulted in a residual value of zero. So that really doesn't help a city or municipality, in particularly around the property tax front. If I can get the next slide. So really there's two affordability questions I look at. Is one is, how can we better understand affordability so we can create effective strategies? And like I said earlier, is that a lot of the data around affordability, it needs to be massaged or looked at a little more carefully. One of the troubles with data coming out of StatsCan, when we look at the SHS survey of household spending, as well as the income data that comes out of the census, is they tend to be matched in 2 different years. And so we end up having these ridiculous statistics like 9% of renter households under the age of 25 in Vancouver pay more than 100% of their income on housing. Well, how can that really happen? What it is the data problem, is the fact that they're either in university, working for mom and dad the year before, had no reported income, and that the very next year, when they had were renting an apartment and paying that rent, they're matching rent to an income stream that was non-existent the year previous. So that's just one example of some of the problems with matching that data. Overall, though, final thoughts is that really affordability via asset deflation is probably not very likely. I mean, we just, several years ago, we went through the Great Recession, as it were, financial crisis in North America in a global perspective. If that wasn't a shock to burst any kind of housing bubble, I don't know what was. Since then, we've seen particularly condominium prices come back up and been quite flat ever since. There's really no evidence today that there's any kind of bubble or speculative bubble welled up in the marketplace, and that prices are going to fall dramatically and make homes more affordable. Affordability measures are problematic. Home price income ratios ignore interest rates, for example, and when compared in different jurisdictions, and when you don't take into account the actual wealth of households and individuals, it can be somewhat suspect in terms of the data or the rankings. Hence, Shaughnessy being much least affordable for people that live there than Maple Ridge or Surrey. Timing of demand and supply, very difficult, because we tend to have relative boom or bust cycles, and as a result, we'll have periods in which you have home building activity slows down, demand picks up a year or two later, much stronger than builders and developers had anticipated, and as a result, we get land prices bid up. First-time buyers, very important critical market segment. You need to make sure that you have a sizable amount of housing in the community that can accommodate affordability of first-time buyers. And finally, the land component is really that variable in which municipalities tend to be trying to play with, is being able to participate in the lift of either through upzoning or bonus densities. At the local level, there's lots of tactics that can be deployed. Some of them are just easy as community plan policies that show commitment to providing a range of choices, increased densities, secondary suites permitted in all single detached dwellings, for example, infill housing, housing agreements, smaller lots, all those kinds of things are very important, which are, I believe our next speaker is going to touch upon in her jurisdiction. And I think my 15 minutes of fame is up. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Cameron. I'm going to open up the line or the Q&As for a couple of quick questions. We will be able to go back after Mayor Ackerman's presentation to have a more robust question and answer period. But if folks have 1 or 2 questions, we can use the next 5-7 minutes for asking Cameron a few questions. So you can either do that through the Q&As or you can unmute. Is that through *6?
To do that, we'd actually have to go off of lecture mode. So what I'll do is kindly, if the audience could support us on this, and if you could mute your line, which is, excuse me, *6 on your phone, and please don't put your phone on hold as well, or we'll be getting music back as well. And then that'll allow us to open up the lines. And what you can do is, use that feedback menu on the top right-hand corner to just change your indicator from green, proceed, to purple, which is question, like we did just off the top, if you were with us at that point. So I'm going to try and go off lecture mode right now, and we'll see how that works, and hopefully we can take some questions that way. Or again, just as Ginny noted, please use that Q&A box right at the top of your screen, just above my indicator here, and you can type in your questions there, and they'll queue up, and you can take them. So, just a moment, I'm going off lecture.
The conference is no longer in lecture mode.
We seem to have a ringing phone line. Does anybody here that have a question that they'd like to pass to Cameron before we move on to the next presentation?
Sure, we're not causing that.
Hopefully everybody on here. If everyone could mute their line again, *6. I should do that. I'm not sure why we have a ringing. That's something new.
Okay. All right.
So, maybe we'll just encourage people to use the Q&As at this point. I'm going to go back to lecture.
The conference is in lecture mode.
Should we give it just a few more seconds, 30 seconds or something, to see if any questions come through the Q&A? Give you a chance to type.
And if not, we'll start with the next presentation, and then we'll have some time at the end for more discussions. Okay. All right. So we'll move on. So thank you, Cameron, and we'll have some more time for questions near the end, and we'll be able to pull all the pieces together. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's all too familiar with what the economic drivers are doing to housing in her community. I'd like to welcome Her Worship Mayor Lori Ackerman of the City of Fort St. John as our second speaker. Mayor Ackerman has lived in the Peace region for 31 years, from 1980 to 1988 in Dawson Creek, and then moved to Fort St. John. She was elected mayor in November of 2011. Prior to this, she has served as a councillor for the City of Fort St. John since 2005. Lori has represented the city as the director with the Peace River Regional District since 2006 and the Northern Development Initiative Trust since 2008. Since becoming mayor, Lori has been appointed to the province's local government RCMP Contract Management Committee and a member of the steering committee for the BC Mayor's Caucus. Her volunteer work, just to name a few, includes Emergency Social Services, Scouts Canada, serving as a founding member of the United Way Cabinet in Fort St. John, and chairing the community's Homeless Shelter Committee. In 2002, she received the Queen's Jubilee Medal for her work in the community, and in 2005, the Silver Acorn for distinguished service in Scouting. Lori is a firm believer that BC can harvest its natural resources with the use of innovative BC-born technology, do it effectively, efficiently, and leave a lighter footprint. Lori was also a speaker at the 2013 Canadian Home Builder Association BC Housing Affordability Symposium in Richmond, and we're delighted that she could join us for our first webinar. So thank you, Mayor Ackerman, and I'll take it away.
Thank you. I'm hoping that you can see me because I've kind of lost the video at this end. However, it's a pleasure. Pardon me?
We can see you.
Oh, perfect. It's a pleasure to be able to have this opportunity to share with you some of the initiatives that BC's Energy Capital has put forward. So just the highlights for the presentation today. And how it's not moving. Sorry.
Hi, Lori. It's Darby here. Are you able to use those arrows just above your start button in the bottom left-hand corner to move the slides?
Well, let's give this a whirl. There we go. Okay, so I'll give you some community information. I'll show you what we've done in our official community plan, Affordable Housing Committee, as well as Site C, and I would be remiss if I did not speak about LNG. We know it as LNG. Some others may know it as liquefied natural gas. So moving on, as I mentioned, Fort St. John is BC's energy capital. We have the two dams on the Peace River already. We have the proposed Site C on our doorstep, 7 kilometers from my downtown. And, of course, the energy industry is here. We are the second largest community north of Kamloops, with only Prince George being the first one. We are one of 4 cities north of the 56th parallel in Canada, the other 3 being Yellowknife, Whitehorse, and Fort McMurray. So we do have Northern Community Development Guidelines. When I drive through Surrey and White Rock, where I lived prior to moving up here, and I see some fabulous things that they're doing down there, I have to imagine that with 6 feet of snow on it. We are in Canada's most northern agricultural area. We do have a very strong forestry industry, and we have some oil here, but predominantly is natural gas, which we hear a lot about. We are one of BC's youngest communities, and just to give you an example, we cut the ribbon on the hospital that was actually opened 3 weeks earlier, and in that 3 weeks there were 33 babies born here. We have young families, a lot of young families here, and the fastest growing demographic is seniors. So when we plan for wheels and more wheels. So in our official community plan, I think I might have missed a slide. There we go. Just talk about affordability from Fort St. John's perspective. First of all, if you take a look at what the average wage is in Fort St. John, a couples only, the average family income is $106,000 per year, and couples with families, $123,000 per year. Lone parent families is over $61,000 per year. So affordability means some slightly different things here than perhaps in other areas of British Columbia. The average construction costs are anywhere from 30 to 40% higher here than in the lower mainland area, specifically because of the cost of trades as well as the cost of supplies. When we look at affordability, we also look at operational costs because when you're living in a community that experiences 40 below, your heating bills can be a little higher, and so we do have to consider when we've got people who are needing affordable housing, they probably could use affordable operational costs as well. Fort St. John, the city of Fort St. John, is going to be cutting the ribbon on North America's most northern passive house in just a few months from now. And if you haven't heard of a passive house, this really refers to a rigorous voluntary standard for energy efficiency in a building and reducing its ecological footprint. So it results in ultra-low energy buildings that really require very little energy for heating or cooling. And in my research, I have only found one bungalow that is further north than what we have, and that is in Scotland. So now we get into our official community plan. So first of all, our official community plan is very robust. I would welcome anyone to take a look at it. I think I've given a link to the facilitators here for this. Our official community plan has 4 guiding principles, and they are listed there. Sorry, I meant to hit the button here while I've got my OCP open in front of me. So the 4 guiding principles are there in front of you: economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, social inclusion, and cultural vitality. Our intention is to build a community that meets the needs of current generation without diminishing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so a lot of our housing conversations, even with our Affordable Housing Committee, has come from our OCP and how we move forward on those. So in particular, some of the official community plan there we go. What we're saying is that housing does not cost greater than 30% of 80% of the median household income in Fort St. John. And because that household income in Fort St. John is considerably higher than in other places, we've taken 80% of that, just really to round it off, because we do recognize that we do have a portion of our population that certainly do not make over $100,000 a year. We refer to a range of housing from non-market housing to standard market ownership, and at any given time, 20% of our population is in need of some form of affordable housing. So we have several objectives and intentions within our OCP. And first of all, of course, one of the objectives is to promote increased affordable housing through partnerships and other levels of government and organizations. And I think that's what was said at the beginning of this webinar, that affordable housing does not happen with just one partner, one stakeholder. It is a partnership. And so the City of Fort St. John certainly is going to take advantage of whatever partnership we can get our hands on. So some of the policy statements within our OCP refer to an intention to provide incentives for the development of affordable housing. So we're looking at 3 points there. We will consider higher density. We will consider reduced parking requirements, and we will consider small lots in planned subdivisions. And now when I say this and you're scratching your head trying to figure out why those would not just be an automatic, as a winter city, we need places to put the snow, otherwise hauling it is going to be an issue. Parking requirements, I can tell you that my vehicle would be considered a large vehicle in Vancouver, but I could fit 2 of my vehicles in my husband's, and I could fit 3 of my vehicles in my son's truck. So we do have different requirements for parking as well as for where we're going to put the snow. Another intention is to promote the development of affordable home ownership options. So restricting the number of consecutive small lots to no more than 3 in a row. And mainly that is because of where do you put the snow. And when considering any proposed small lots, we will require a covenant on title to ensure affordability for at least 10 years. And a lot of that is simply because there is a lot of movement in the community still, even with the amount of growth that we have experienced with people staying here. Another intention is to ensure a balance between community density, design, and affordability. And Council will only consider small lots in pre-zoned for mobile homes or newly created small lots in newly proposed subdivision, and Council will permit no more than approximately 1/3 of the lots within a 10-hectare area as small lot development. We do have one neighborhood that is entirely small lot, and it is it's a nightmare. There's a lot of parking on the streets, unfortunately. Council will consider secondary suites and lane and carriage housing on residential lots of 550 meters square or greater if there's adequate space for parking and adequate space for snow storage. So that just really goes to the concern that we have for those. We pulled together an affordable housing committee that I chair. Very pleased to have the opportunity to chair that committee. The membership of that committee is extremely diverse. The purpose of the committee is to aid in the development and delivery of community-based approach to affordable housing and the associated services within the city. We will encourage affordable housing development within the city with developers and other housing providers in order to increase the affordable housing stock in the city. The Affordable Housing Committee will provide advice and recommendation on issues and policies pertaining to citywide affordable housing on behalf of the community at large. And they'll also review affordable housing proposals and provide recommendations to staff and council. And that has already happened. We were very fortunate that a developer came in and was seeking some higher density, and we were successful in achieving that rezoning with the aid of our Affordable Housing Committee, because quite often councils will face a lot of backlash when there is going to be a higher density proposed. And if you've got a committee of well-respected people from the community who very clearly indicate the benefit of this, it really does help the council move forward on some of these things. So the Affordable Housing Committee by themselves created 7 options for the council to consider, and I'm pleased to say that council did review those in February of this year, and they were all agreed upon, and so I'll just zip through those here. The first recommendation is prioritization developed based on current need in the community and the city's ability to assist. And so we looked at low-cost market as being the first priority, simply because there was a lot of people moving here, and if we did have some lower-cost market housing, that would move them through the continuum of housing out of some of the rental stock that we have presently, and thereby freeing up some of that rental stock for those who were just moving to Fort St. John or unable to get a down payment. Transitional and supportive housing was our second priority, and I'm pleased to say that the Salvation Army also recognized that, and the Salvation Army is building a large new, renovated transition house and shelter for the community. The low-cost market ownership really is, it just makes things more affordable, and it assists young families to find their home base. I was just down in Victoria the other day, and on the plane on the way down, it was a young mom going to Seychelles to visit her parents while her husband renovated their bathroom. And she had her little 1-year-old child on her lap, and they were able to afford a house in Fort St. John where they would not have been able to afford that house elsewhere. The second recommendation is that we will consider changes to the land use based on a changing economic and social environment, and that really speaks to the recommendation that came to council for rezoning. The Affordable Housing Committee stepped up and spoke in favor of that recommendation. The third recommendation really speaks to what needs to go into the decision for the ability to accommodate future housing needs. And so the decision-making points need to be The 3 boxes there: projected population growth over the next 5, 10, 15 years, housing type that will be needed, the size, capacity, and affordability, and the current zoning capacity of future development sites. So we do need to ensure that we consider those as we move forward. 4th recommendation is to research and use appropriate policy and incentive-based tools to promote home ownership. So we will leave no stone unturned. We must be willing not only to look outside the box, but also just to rebuild the box that we find ourselves in sometimes as local government. So we're looking at Saskatoon's housing business plan. We've had conversations with the City of Langford on how they've moved forward. And the Northern Development Initiative Trust also has initiatives that, as a municipality, as a local government, we can look at for tools to provide affordable housing. The 5th recommendation is really to complete an inventory of vacant land and its potential for residential occupancy. Presently, you can see the different types of housing that we have, what our current stock is, and what the targets are within our official community plan. So how do we move from 83% semi-detached homes currently to OCP target of 50%? I think we can do it. We are actually headed that direction. How long that will take us, who knows? The 6th recommendation is to advocate that potential temporary work camps developed for Site C be built in a similar fashion to the Olympic Village in order to be repurposed after the project use right across the province. I realized that there were some issues with what was done with the Olympic Village, but I believe that process has been tried, and we can certainly work out the kinks. And in speaking to BC Housing, I'm not hearing that it is not possible. I know that there are several small communities that were beneficiaries of those units as they came across the province. So we have not only Site C, but we just heard yesterday from TransCanada Pipeline that they would be putting in several camps in because they're building 2 pipelines, or they're proposing 2 pipelines, and we need to ensure that we make the best use of the resources and the opportunities that are in front of us right now with those resource projects moving forward. The 7th recommendation is to adhere to the accessibility requirements for housing set forth in the OCP. So we are encouraging people to build their homes so that they are at least visitable, if not completely accessible. And we're finding that even with the cost being higher here in the north for construction, we have to recognize that in order to build even accessible homes, it's really not that much more. So those are the 7 recommendations from the Affordable Housing Committee that were approved by Council. So I'll just talk a little bit about the Site C. In their environmental impact statement, they are projecting that 85% of trades will stay in the camp and 15% would stay in the city. 85% of the supervisors would stay in the city and 15% in camp. Those are only the people who are working for the project itself. That does not include those who would come up to accommodate working for some of the subcontractors. They expect that this project will impact the city by driving our population rate ahead by 3 years. So we're seeing a 3% growth rate per year. That'll be a 9% growth rate. So it's going to be quite interesting. It's going to create some market imbalance for rentals and ownership. And they indicate that they feel that maybe 3% would be seeking temporary accommodations. So this is just where I want to stick in the LNG as well. We hear a lot about the LNG in BC's Northwest, and I can tell you from our calculations, and I'm being very conservative here, for every billion that is invested in BC's Northwest, there will be $3.86 billion invested here. Patronus, the announcement that Patronus made not long ago could drive that even further. Our planning curve sees us at 40,000 before we even consider plateauing. Keep in mind that the city itself is only at about 21,600 in population right now. So what the community really needs is for the province to provide the right policy and support so that we are able to manage these projects moving forward. And I know that we heard about how secondary suites in all detached homes. That might be something that would be amenable in another location. Unfortunately, that conversation has come up several times in our council and has never passed. Fort McMurray, however, has got a program where I think we might be able to take a look at it, and that would really be if there's going to be secondary suites in every single detached home, they must be able to provide parking, and the owner would live there. So that's the kind of thing that we would be looking at if we were to move forward with that particular thing. And so with that, thank you very much, and we'll take questions, I guess.
Excellent. Thanks, Lori. So you have this opportunity to provide some comments and questions and some good discussion, I hope, to ask both the presenters and kind of get the juices flowing on this really important issue. I see there's already a few in the Q&A, so we'll start from the top one that's come in, and this one is actually for Cameron. The question is housing affordability tied to low interest rates? What happens when interest rates move back up to historical rates? Is there government not forced to keep interest rates low indefinitely?
That's a real good question. I think when we look at affordability, there's three components, and there's incomes are important, prices are important, and interest rates are important. And that's why I kind of rail against these home prices and income ratios. They ignore the fact that interest rates are at the bottom of a 25-year decline. So if we weren't above our long-term average in terms of home price to income ratios, then we would be in a housing recession. Interest rates are on their way up. It's a matter of when, if there's going to begin at least on the short-term rates next summer or the year after. But interest rates will normalize, coinciding with the economy firing on all cylinders. Now, when we look at the normalization, if you will, where we're going to end up, it's going to be quite a slow and gradual rise in rates. So I don't really expect it to have a significant impact on the market other than this, is that all those good things around stronger economic growth, economy firing on all cylinders, more jobs, rising wages, all those good things are supportive and accommodative to housing demand, but they're going to be largely offset in the next few years by normalizing rates, which is going to start to chip away or erode affordability. So the combination of those two, somewhat of a thaw. I don't think there's a significant risk of 1981 or 82 style interest rates. Canadians are very sensitive to interest rates right now, and I really don't see them going up dramatically, but it is certainly within the realm of possibilities that if we look at, let's say, prime rate, for example, the prime rate could hit around 5% or so by the time interest rates fully normalize.
Excellent. Thanks, Cameron, and that's from Remy. Our next question is actually for Mayor Ackerman, and this is from David. How does Fort St. John define a small lot?
Very good question. We have, I know that our planner uses metric, and I'm not good at metric, so I'm thinking it's, if this helps, 38 units per hectare. And so the regular lots are more like 20 units per hectare.
David, does that answer your question? You can put up a hand or type in another question if you want some more specificity on that.
Yeah, I think unfortunately we won't be able to use the audio portion of things today, so please type in your notes. But we do.
Or if he's interested, if David's interested, he can send an email or whatever works, and I can get that information specific for him.
Okay, thank you. And we'll pass out some emails at the end of the session. The next question is from the Office of Housing and Construction Standards, HQ. The question is actually back to Lori. Do you know whether a passive house costs more to build than a conventional home, and if so, by how much?
And that's exactly what we're going to learn when we're finished building it. That's the reason why the city has taken it on, as we're trying to show our developers that it can be done, and at a very similar cost, or a cost that is close enough that the affordability comes in the operational part of it. So we'll know that in a few months.
Okay, thanks, Lori. The next question comes from John, and this is back to Lori. What is the City of Fort St. John doing to build social housing or provide renter assistance?
We are supporting the Salvation Army, and we provide some grants and aids through permissive tax exemptions, but we don't actually build the social housing or provide renter assistance ourselves.
Okay, thanks. The next one is from Owen back. You're the popular answer of questions, Lori. Mayor Ackerman, is there a link to your Affordable Housing Committee report? I can't seem to find it on the Fort St. John website.
Yeah, if you go into, it would be on our website under Mayor and Council, and you'll see agendas, council agendas, and you're looking for the February 12th, 2013 meeting, and it is administrative report number 0289/12.
Okay, thanks. Our next question is from Jamie. Back to Lori. How will Fort St. John finance the community amenities to maintain high livability in the face of such rapid population increase? Well, that's a good one.
How will Fort St. John finance the community amenities? Amenities as in the nice recreational amenities?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's sort of like talking about daycares, community centers, some of those community amenity pieces.
Well, the city, that's where, I had mentioned at the end that we really do require the right policies and support in place to ensure that we can provide quality of place and quality of life to our residents. We do have a fabulous recreational center that has North America's third speed skating oval in it already. We are just finishing off building a brand new fire hall here. So how do we finance that? We have a fair share agreement that we benefit from, and other than that, we have development cost charges in place to ensure that the most important amenity, that being water and sewer, is looked after.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Any other questions? That was kind of the list from the Q&As. Unfortunately, we can't unmute the lines. We have to keep it in lecture mode because we've got that phone that keeps calling into the line for some reason. Oh, here's another one from Dylan. For Lori, what has your experience been in terms of working in partnership with the natural gas industry and BC Hydro in planning for and developing workforce housing? Well,
so our number one issue facing us, of course, is Site C. And rather than taking a position on the Make the Lake Committee or the Dam Society, we decided that Noah wasn't in favor of the flood, but he built an ark. So the community had to be proactive and promote our community and protect the assets that we had. So we just pulled together a very in-depth conversation piece with the community, and it's called Let's Site C, and you'll find that on our website as well. We've just won 3 national awards and an international award for finding out what our residents felt about how their life would be impacted by these proposals moving forward. I can tell you that the natural gas industry has thanked us for providing that for them. It's what we're saying to them is we don't expect them to build us a fabulous community. We already have a fabulous community. Just don't knock us off our compass bearing that we have established in our official community plan. We did all of this because of BC Hydro. We've been thanked by the natural gas industry, and Hydro has said nothing. Does that help?
I think that nails it.
Mm-hmm.
Open to some other questions. I actually have one or two that to both you, Lori, and to Cam, and they're both demographic change issues. There's a lot of speculation of what the baby boomer generation will do once they retire. What do you think the impact will be on the availability and price of single detached homes once they sell and onto homes that they might downsize to? Where do you think there will be sort of the greatest impacts in the province, and how might that affect housing prices? Maybe Cam, I'll pass it on to you first.
Sure. Being a baby boomer, I can't afford to retire, so now when we look at that kind of thesis was originally put out there by David Foote. Remember the book Boom, Bust, and Echo? That was actually supposed to happen 2001 through 2006. It never really quite did, and the idea was that, you know, because of demographic reasons, the boomers, the large single detached home in the suburb was going to be a white elephant. No one's going to want it anymore, and home prices may fall as a result of that. He's admitted that that part was not entirely sufficient to manifest itself in reality. Really, when we look at all demographic forecasts, and the most local one here, of course, the BC Stats says their people model. When we look at household growth, or we look at age cohorts and household growth, we see that there will be sufficient demand for single detached homes in the suburbs going forward, but the big growth, the additional demand on the housing market, is going to come primarily from seniors, adult lifestyles over 55 years old going forward. So, in the next 15 years, we're probably looking at 3/4 of all additional housing demand is going to come from that sector, or those age segments, the boomers picking the python, if you will. And so that's going to have an impact on the way seniors housing is arranged. My sense is that, single detached home in major urban centers such as Vancouver and Victoria is becoming a smaller and smaller proportion of the housing stock. So I think that's quite a countervailing force in the sense that prices in those markets will likely go up rather than go down if we look at single detached homes in the future.
Excellent. Lori, how do you've already talked a little bit about planning for wheels. What kind of impact of the downsizing of the consumer generation in Fort St. John?
Well, I think as it sits right now, if we were to look out over the next 10 years, even 20 years, that baby boomers moving into smaller residence or homes would really ease up on the demand side here.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I'll pass. We've got a question coming in. I'm guessing it's from the City of Vancouver. Could be the City of Victoria. Could Cameron comment on the impact of housing supply on affordability?
Sure. When we look at, and I had a slide about that earlier, is that it's real difficult to match supply with demand in these kind of medium-term cycles. And so, like I explained earlier, this last cycle was kind of the perfect storm. Late 90s, we had, on the coast anyway, leaky condo crisis. Every second or third building had a giant green tarp on it. It was like a big billboard for first-time buyers: don't buy a home, it's a hell of a risky investment. and they didn't. And that caused a lot of pent-up demand to well in the marketplace. After 9/11, interest rates went down. Consumers saw affordability, had a big injection of liquidity in the market, and as a result, we saw a big run-up in sales activity without the supply just to satiate that demand, and that caused prices to go up. And so supply is very important. Oftentimes we see demand, and demand is looked and it's solely in itself, but I'll just give you one example. Is in Vancouver last year, there's lots of talk of the Vancouver bubble that has finally burst because sales were declining. They were down 20% and 30% year over year. But what happened was there was also a supply response where a well-diversified market, households with pretty strong balance sheets were really in a position where they could say, well, wait a minute, if the market's not doing well, I'm not going to put my home on the market. So we didn't see supply get too far out of whack last year. And in spite of the fact we saw sales fall to a cyclical low on a per capita basis, the lowest we've seen since the late 90s, home prices actually only came off about 4.5% for the year, and so far this year they've been made up about half of that.
Thanks, Cameron. Another question here from Corey, and maybe it's to both Cameron and Lori. Any advice for small communities? Valemount has about 1,000 residents, very little rentals available, almost none, and high-priced housing. How much of it not lived in full-time vacation housing for letters, etc.?
So is Valemount considered a resort community? I guess I know that some communities are, and they've got different opportunities for growth. Besides all of that, it's really about, just as you would with a business retention and expansion program for your community, if you're trying to bring in, if you're trying to bring in investors, sometimes it's the people who you've already got there that might be willing to expand on their housing stock and invest in more rental for you. As far as I can tell you, as far as the high-priced housing, people who live in that high-priced housing actually quite like the equity that shows up. And really, some people are just not interested in what they would refer to as flooding the market with more housing to decrease the value of their house. So you walk a fine line there, but if you know your community and you have a strategy for inviting investors in, then sometimes it is going to take the community to invest in itself and go out and meet with those investors and promote your community.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that with small communities in BC, you've got to be careful about, or at least be cognizant of population growth. When we have areas, a lot of areas have, even in the north is doing actually so well in this post-recession period. Many communities have pretty flat population trajectories. So, adding additional units to the marketplace may not be the appropriate thing to do, at least in terms of attracting people there, because basically you have to have demand before that supply is added to the marketplace. So I think some careful consideration about is there sufficient demand for this rental housing? We can zone for it or provide incentives for it, but people actually have to want to live there.
This is the other part to my question, which is around demographics. I touched on the baby boomer segment, but also looking at this Gen Y or young people, which is now kind of being termed, they're sort of the renter generation. So we hear a lot of young people have difficulty finding solid jobs after university or college, and about this boomerang generation of folks who move out of their parents' homes and have to move back in for financial reasons. How do we see, and I'll pass it to you, Cameron, first, how do you see that affecting the housing market over the long run?
I think that there's a number of strategies are deployed. Number one, I think that young buyers or first-time buyers are ever increasingly older. I mean, I hate to say my generation, where we bought our homes typically in our 20s. Now it kind of gets pushed out to the 30s. Some of that is because education is much longer. We have a longer period in universities or technical schools, for example, in which they're not ready, willing, and able to buy a home. But I do think that one thing I've certainly noticed about the younger generations is, if we want to call it the echo generation or even earlier or later, is that they really want to be located close to urban areas and amenities, and are certainly less likely to want that single attached home with all the maintenance involved with mowing the lawns and cleaning the gutters. To them, proximity seems to be very important, and I think that bodes well with sustainable housing initiatives or density initiatives, walkable communities, all those kinds of things that are dovetailing together in urban areas throughout North America.
Lori, you talked about, you're a young city. Do you think that will have ramifications to the young population in your housing market?
No, we had the Affordable Housing Committee had some mortgage advisors come in and speak to us about affordability, and they indicated to us that if you are gainfully employed here in Fort St. John and you can't afford a house, it's because you perhaps made some bad credit choices earlier in life. I can tell you that my youngest child, she's now 27, has been in her own home since she was 24. And not that I'm complaining, but her house is way nicer than mine, but she's got more to clean. And so I meet people here on a regular basis, young people who have moved up here and have come up to buy their own home. And I just got a couple of emails yesterday, friends of people who want to move up here and get jobs up here, and because they want to get into the real estate market, they want to own a home, and they're just unable to own a home elsewhere.
I just want to add to that on the demographic side is that we're about to see quite a transference of wealth from the boomer generation to the echo generation, and a part of that's coming not as a result of the death rate, if you will. It's a result of transferring portions of equity that have been built up by the boomers to their children through home equity lines of credit or similar vehicles in order to help them out with their down payments. And there's a significant amount of younger home buyers today that are being helped out by their relatively house-rich parents today.
Yes, I would definitely say that is a factor, especially in my cohort, who is the 30 to 40 group, and especially in Metro Vancouver. I'll have time for just one more question if folks in the ether want to post one to the board. If not, I'm going to wrap things up. We've got about 5 minutes left before we have to wrap up the webinar. So I'll leave a couple of seconds for anybody who has one last burning question to post on the Q&A for either Cameron or Lori. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody today for joining us. We've kind of reached the end of the time for the webinar. I want to thank our speakers for taking today and to share the information with us. I think it's been a great kickoff to our pilot webinar series, and we hope to see folks who have joined us at our webinars. Actually, if you can go to the next slide. So our next webinar is in November around where do housing costs come from. Just inside, take a look at a pro forma, see what makes or breaks the housing project. And then in January, we'll talk about secondary suites. We'll have 2 local governments come in and talk about what worked for them, what doesn't, what are some of the issues they've had around this kind of gentle densification. Before we sign off, I want to, again, thank our industry partners. Darby's going to put Cameron and Mayor Ackerman's email information. I also want to thank so much Darby and the Economic Development Branch for providing us coordinating and steering the technical process and doing a lot of the coordinating for this webinar. I also want to say that we do have a survey that we're going to be sending you in the next little bit. That'll just give us some feedback about the webinar today and any suggestions that you have for future topics. Also, here's a resource page of links to some of our partners and some of the pages that you might find useful and helpful. I also want to thank my cohort who helped to organize these webinars, Dale Anderson, who works with me at the Office of Housing and Construction Standards. Another note, too, is that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the Rural BC website, along with temporarily some of the resource materials such as PowerPoint. So please feel free to log back in or let others know that this information is available. And I will turn it over to Darby to say goodbye.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you, Natalia, as well, for helping us out. And again, I'd like to thank Ginny and Dale for so much coordination around the content together. Great webinar. Thanks very much to our presenters. And please, I'm just going to reemphasize that survey. We really appreciate your feedback on the survey. Help us make these webinars as good as they can be, and keep your eyes on that email coming to you in the next couple days. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you.